Start his presentation. Everybody in the back, can you hear me? Hello? Everybody in the back, please take your seat. We are on a tight schedule. Otherwise, we won't eat for lunch. I'm serious.
Don't worry, I'm going to make the presentation quick, and we can all wait. But we have to start. So people in the back, can you hear me okay? Yeah? Okay, let's go. Can we have the slides on the screen? Yep. Yeah, so I'm going to talk about how we name components badly. And there is a very good reason why we name components badly. And there is this saying that there are only two hard things in computer science. So one is cache invalidation, the other is naming things, and the third one is off-by-one errors. And indeed, it's very hard to name things. We sometimes confuse things, and especially when it comes to user interface, we do make lots of mistakes. So without further ado, let's explore how we got to the stage where we are currently. So how did we get here? Let's start with the very basics. I'm talking about the text-based user interface. So that's in the early, I don't know, 60s or something. I wasn't born there. But people were having computers. They needed to interact with them, and they had to create some sort of interface to do so. And they all did it using text. So like everything you see on this screen is written with text, everything. So those are all ASCII symbols. So it's text-based. Being text-based, it means it's not with a fine detail. Instead, it's coarse. It also relies on symbols and bright colors. And because this is before the mouse was invented, everything was keyboard-based, and people kind of really needed this thing just to work. So they didn't have that many components. Actually, they had very few components. But for 1 second, imagine that you're one of those engineers at that time, in the early, late 60s, and you create this thing that didn't exist a couple of days ago, and now you have to name the things. Well, how do you call something that doesn't exist, that didn't exist before? How do you call it in a way that people are able to understand it? And here is the first question. How do we actually name things? And it's not a very profound one. So my name is Ivan. It means, Ivan is in Bulgarian, but it comes from Greek, which is Yuan. And then it comes from, I think, Hebrew, and it's Yehohanan, which means God is graceful, whatever. Like, we are not in the church. Like, how do we name things in the computer? Well, we have this thing called metaphor. It's using the knowledge about something we know to describe something we don't know. So, for instance, the menu. The menu is a lot like a restaurant menu. You choose from a discrete set of options to do something. A button, it's something you push, literally, like all around us we have buttons. Then you have the radio button, which is, well, from radios you have one of many choices, which are mutually exclusive. If you ever wonder why it's called a radio button, that's why. You also have the checkbox, which is, well, it's easier. I mean, just check something, you're done. And then you have the dialog, which prompts you for some action. And it's a lot like the computer is trying to say something to you. And all those components are present in that text-based user interface. And that's before the mouse was invented. And by the way, the mouse is also a metaphor. And it's also a wordplay because the first thing we display was called computer-aided display technology. So it was a cat, and then it was a mouse. Anyhow, but you have the mouse, you have more powerful computers, and that leads to graphical user interface. So now you can have bitmap-based interface. You can have finer detail. You have window managers. You have millions of colors. Well, like if you were old enough to remember the older Windows, so you could go 256, then 16-something, then 65-something, and then millions of colors. It was called like that, millions of colors. And then also you have many more components, like gazillions. And you have to organize them in a way, or I think you should. I don't know, like people maybe did it, maybe not. But that gave us the UI kit. So you have the desktop class UI kits like GTK and Qt and Carbon, Kuko, and UI kit, which is on Windows. And then you have WinForms, VPF, and WinUI, which is on Windows. And then you have the web class components or widgets. So you have Dojo, you never heard of it. YUI, you never heard of it. YUX, you never heard of it. It was renamed to Ext.js, and then it was renamed to Sencha. And maybe you heard Sencha. But like all these people, they made components. And they named them. And that leads us to the problem. So what the problem is? The problem is that sometimes we have a component that, that has a name. And sometimes we don't call it the same name in the different platforms. So an example is the notification, like the beginning of my slide. I call it notification, but let's say the guys at Bootstrap, they call it an alert. The guys at Google, they call it a toast. It's also called snack bar, passive notification, notification bubble, blah, blah, blah. It's a notification. You also have other components. Excuse me, I need a sip of water. You have other components like the menu button. And it's a very simple component. You click it, you get a button. And yet we have so many names for that. We call it a drop-down button, a pull-down button, a drop-down menu, or just a menu if you're using material. And then we have the data table, which is a very aptly named component. It just displays some data. That's it. But we also call it a table, or a list, or a details list, or a data list. And if you are into ASP.NET, or just .NET, we either call it grid or grid view. And it all becomes very confusing real quickly. And one more example, real quickly. It's the HBox or VBox, which is a component that just arranges your content either horizontally or vertically. And then it's called hstack or vstack if you're using any of the Apple products, or HBox layout and VBox layout if you're using Qt, or stack layout and stack panel if you're using .NET. And it gets really confusing. And it's normal to ask yourself, why do we have so many names for different things? Like, how did we get here? How did we? And honestly, I don't know the answer. Like, I think somebody should do like a 4-hour presentation just to find that answer. But I have a couple of ideas. And one of those is, if you've seen The Big Lebowski, you know the quote. If you didn't, sorry about that. But like, when we name things and we see something that's existing, we're like, nah. That's how you name it. I'm going to name it differently. Or then you have the competition angle, which is, oh, you did this? I'm going to do it better. I'm going to do it differently. And also, you have the hubris, like the ego. It's like, oh, no, you did this wrong. And, well, you have just, like, I'm going to name it like this. That's it. And maybe that's a very big, gross oversimplification, but hear me out for a couple more minutes. So sometimes we have to consider competition. So imagine you're a company that makes products, and you have a competitor, and you need to stand out. So sometimes we would name things differently just to be different from the other guys. Also, we have ecosystem lock-in. So sometimes you don't want your users to leave you. So you make things named a certain way so people would kind of prefer you over the other guy. Or sometimes you just want to make something new, or, well, you say it's new. It's the same old thing, but you call it something new. Sometimes the naming is based on experience. So for instance, the hstack thingy, it's named how you transform equations into matrices. So you either transform them horizontally or vertically, and like many guys back in the days were mathematicians, not only computer guys, and were like, oh, that's a nice idea. So we're going to use the algorithm, horizontal stacking or vertical stacking, for this component. Sometimes it's standard. So for instance, the word comes from the, I don't know how you say it in Romanian, but it's like the web components, accessibility guidelines, blah, blah, blah. So they define that component, that row of component as an award. So when the Bootstrap guys, they name their things, they use that set standard. And also, like I said, sometimes it's either people being mediocre, or sometimes they want the hype, or sometimes they're overconfident or overcompensating, and like reasons not strictly technical. But apart from that, you also have platform considerations. So on the left side, you have tabs and bottom navigation directly taken from the Google guidelines. So this is material. And then on the right side, you have, again, directly from the guidelines of Apple, the tabs. And they behave differently from one another. So for instance, on iOS and on macOS, you have the same component. It's just tabs. But on iOS, it can be on top, bottom, left, right, on macOS, excuse me. And then on iOS, it's only at the bottom. At the same time, if you look at Android, they both have bottom navigation and tabs. And it's a reason to have those because the operating systems developed at different paces. So sometimes we have components which look the same, but are named differently, and components that look different, but are named the same. Which is better? I don't know. Like, I really, honestly don't know. But so having all this in mind, why should you care? Well, maybe you don't need to care. But if you don't care how components are named, then you shouldn't complain when things don't go your way. Mostly you should care because you're a developer, because you're a professional, and because you really need to know the connection between the different parts. You need to know how things are named so you can be consistent. So I don't know how many of you do user interface, how many are system developers, but if you have to make, let's say, a desktop application, a website, and a mobile application, and you have to use a suite of components, you really need to know which component is which in which state. So consistency is very important, and knowing which component is named how is going to help you. Also, like, very economical, it saves time, like really saves time. And being able to know which component is what is flexible. So, in this suite we have this thing for desktop and the same thing for mobile and for web, so we can use the same component, etc., etc. And if you know what the different components are, excuse me, you can adapt for design systems. So when somebody comes and tells you, so I assume most of you here are Google-related developers, well, their thing is called material. But if you go into the IBM world, their thing is called Carbon, I think. And then if you go into SAP world, their thing is called Fiori, and so on and so forth. So knowing how components are named in the different places will help you, if you need to, adapt or switch different systems. So yeah, and finally, and my personal favorite, if you know the connections, how things are named, you're going to work less. Because when somebody tells you, oh, we need this component, like, no, we have it. It's just differently named. So I'm not going to spend a single day working on that new component. Which brings us to the third part of this talk. And it's, what can we do? I mean, what can we do about this name disparity, so many components? And one thing you can do is obviously educate yourself, like read manuals, explore native graphic toolkit user interfaces, but you also should be critical. When you see something that's new or appears to be new, you should ask yourself, like, is this really a new thing? Like, maybe we have it in this form. Then you should also educate other people, like, and tell them, oh, you know what? So, like, maybe this is not a new component. Maybe this is an existing component, and like you can see it here. And if it's a new component, and you're doing something new, maybe you have something similar in your inventory. So I'm not that familiar with Angular, for instance. Like, I mostly do native JavaScript, but I'm pretty sure you can do extension in Angular, or if you're into React, you can do component composition. So you can reuse your existing components to create something new. And finally, as a last resort, if you need to create a new component that you don't have, Well, create it. It's like sometimes you just have to create a new component. By the way, I'm terribly sorry, but I got very excited, so I spoke faster, which made my presentation shorter. So yeah, I told you I was going to be fast. Do you have questions? Well, not having questions is great. It means either you understood everything or you didn't get anything from what I just said. I presume it's the latter. So you're either hungry or I was talking indeed too fast. Yeah. You can find me on GitHub. That's the only social thing I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ivan. Okay, leave it here.
That's it, you can eat.
No, 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 no.
Oh, they can't?
No, not right now. Thank you. Presenter 2.0. I changed myself. Just the UI, a little bit of the UI. Okay, so the next speaker is Bogdan Alexe with template-based extraction of visual information for documents.
Da, nu e nevoie. The HDMI. Okay, test. Can you hear me? Yep. Okay, just one moment. Okay, okay.